We are preparing this podcast series as part of the Women in Social Peace project. The main aim of this series is to benefit and inspire women from the experiences and stories of women mediators and peace builders from Turkey and the world.
In this series, as Dilara Gök, Dilan and Tunç Karaçay, we came together with valuable women mediators and peace builders.
We will be pleased to bring their voices together with you.
Hello everyone, I am Dilara Gök.
Hi, I am Tunç Karaçay.
In today's program, we have a valuable guest, very well-known peace activist and mediator, Betty Bigombe from Uganda. Welcome again, Betty. We are really glad to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel extremely honored and flattered too to have been invited to participate in your series.
Welcome, Betty. It's a pleasure for us to talk with you. Dilara, thank you for your nice introduction. We will continue with our questions, but before we start to talk, I would like to introduce you. It is not easy to summarize your experiences and works, but I will try my best. Betty Bigombe is an internationally recognized award-winning expert in conflict resolution, armed conflict mediation, and post-conflict peacemaking and rehabilitation. Betty Bigombe has played a key role in conflict resolution in Africa. She led the peace and humanitarian efforts in northern Uganda, first in 1990s as Minister of State for Northern Uganda and later her private capacity as a chief mediator to the conflict in the 2000s. Betty initiated peace talks in northern Uganda conflict that had lasted more than 20 years, and she successfully mediated the reunification of Sudan People's Liberation Movement of South Sudan. And also, Betty Bugamba is a member of Women Mediators Across the Commonwealth, WMC, a network hosted by Constellation Resources which connects women with a broad range of mediation knowledge and experience. As I said, it is not possible to summarize your personal info in limited time, but if you want to add something more, please do not hesitate during the question part of our program. So if you want, I can start with our first question. We already know that you were appointed Minister of State for Pacification of Uganda to stop violence and to start peace talks, which has also had a huge impact on your life, as you said. And you reached out to Joseph Kony, who is the leader of Lord's Resistance Army, despite so many threats at that time. It was a really, really incredible experience, we think. And what would you like to tell us about these negotiations? What difficulties did you experience during this process?
Well, thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity. The only thing you left out when you were introducing me is that until recently, I have been a senior director at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. This was a global responsibility for countries that are fragile and or are already in conflict. So that gave me a very broad perspective, fragility of countries and violence in various parts of the world. That said, yes, I was sent as a minister for pacification of the North and Northeastern Uganda, a war, as you said it, that lasted more than 20 years, displaced more than 2 million people. And according to UNICEF, over 200,000, children were abducted and given arms to fight. Initially, my responsibility was not to negotiate. That was not what the president of Uganda wanted. He wanted me to persuade people, to persuade their children to put down their weapons. But when I arrived there, I realized that there were issues that needed to be negotiated on. There was a lot of anger. There were outstanding issues like marginalization of the people of the North. And so they were supporting the war. And I thought, and not only that, it is also my conviction that military solution does not bring sustainable peace, because a group of people get humiliated when they're militarily defeated. But when you negotiate, it gives a platform for those who cannot be heard to be heard, for issues to be addressed. And it is my conviction that a negotiated settlement is very important in any kind of conflict to bring lasting peace. So it was then my turn, after listening to people, it was then my turn to persuade Uganda government to agree to a negotiated settlement as opposed to military settlement. And this negotiation, it was negotiating to the rebels to accept a negotiated settlement. It was also a negotiation with even the soldiers, government soldiers, who were fighting, that a political settlement was much better than a military settlement of the conflict. So in mediation, it's not just sitting around the table to talk. The process starts way outside, reaching out to individuals, reaching out to groups of people, the various stakeholders to the peace process. So, and it's true also that the Lord's Resistance Army was not fighting a conventional war. They had this belief that the leader talked to God directly. So their conduct was bizarre. In fact, the war was more on people by them than fighting government, because people, like I said earlier, young children were forcefully conscripted into the forces and immediately given weapons, so they became killing machines. The leader believed in a very bizarre religious uh, kind of things. And yet, at the same time, they did exactly the opposite to the ordinary people. So now the challenge was, if somebody believes he talks directly to God, so there was no political ideology that they believed in, that you could start with that. So basically, what I drew out, well, having persuaded all the parties to agree to a negotiated settlement, I started the process. But what, in a case like this, what was the agenda? I found out that since people were so disgruntled with the government, they felt they were marginalized in terms of development, in terms of employment. They felt there was a high level of nepotism in fighting. So those became the topics on which to mediate between the Lord's Resistance Army and the government. So, although I was in government, this first phase, because there were two phases, a first phase was to definitely draw the agenda on what the complaints of the people was that I composed as on the agenda. Mediation also is an area, a field which draws a lot of people. People want to mediate. It brings in spoilers, brings in people who are in diaspora, brings in people who do not necessarily want peace. And also, I realize that some people do profit in conflict situations, suppliers of weapons. The soldiers in this case, some of them were benefiting from the war. So you need to reach out all these different groups of people to get them to agree to a negotiated settlement. And another thing too, which is very, very important, is patience. 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 We are talking to people who are deeply scarred, who are deeply hurt, who are full of hatred. And therefore, don't think overnight, especially intrastate conflicts, that you can win their hearts and overnight they will say, no, we don't want, they may not want war anymore. But you also have to build trust between you, the mediators, and the negotiators, trust among themselves. So confidence building are some of the first steps that must not be ignored. Uh, Building trust in you as the mediator is one of the virtues. Patience, being ability to listen, because when somebody is psychologically affected, that they feel they were wronged, and in this case, I'm talking about people who were abducted, people who have lost their loved ones, people who have lost all their properties, people who dignity has been taken away from them because they're staying in camps. It is very important that you listen to, because usually they want to vent out their anger and their frustrations. So ability to listen is very important. Now, of course, one of the major challenges I faced was being a woman. In that, right from the beginning, the rebels felt this is a male domain. We don't want a woman here. We're going to kill you. Even the ordinary people were very skeptical whether I could manage such a job, if I may call it a job. At that time, there were not very many women in the field of conflict resolution. Women were more victims than mediators. So that was a huge challenge to be able to overcome that skepticism of the people. So as a woman, you do things in excess, want to be accepted, to be trusted, to be um, to convince people that yes, what you're doing is you can manage. So you go extra miles to get that trust, to build the trust, both within the population you're trying to save, as well as the parties to the conflict. And all these take time to do.
Thank you so much, Betty. Before asking the other question, I would like to underline one of your sentences. You said military solution does not bring sustainable peace. Just want to highlight and mark a big star on this one before my question. Regarding your mediation experiences in Africa region, I wonder what are the effects of the warship for conflicting parties? How do they perceive the peace process? How could you point out these factors actually?
Yeah. Well, just like us. Right. Yeah. Once war breaks out, it is not very easy to mediate. It brings a lot of challenges. Because, first of all, there's a research, and maybe I will share it with you, the psychology of a fighter. Both sides usually do not want to be perceived as weak people. And therefore, convincing them to agree to come to table to talk, usually it takes a lot because everybody says, I will be perceived as weak to accept a negotiated settlement. And that usually makes it very difficult to bring the parties to the table. The other thing, too, when the war started, negotiate the impact on peace building, both parties are usually using inflammatory language to outdo the other. Inflammatory language. How can you control that? That is usually not easy to bring to bear, to get the parties not to use inflammatory language at war. After all, they're killing one another. Then there's always, you know, people are dying. Destruction is taking place. So to get both parties usually are trying to avenge or to revenge on the other people. So that affects peace building because that spirit of revenge. They've done this to me. I'm going to do something probably even worse to revenge what they've done to my people. It's exactly what we are seeing now in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. And I talked about displacement, forced displacement. It takes away dignity from people that, one time you have relative comfort in your own home. You might be poor, but you're not begging for food. Suddenly you see people who who were living in dignity with what they had, everything taken away from them. And they're lining up for food, lining up for clothes. Children are crying. The health issues that usually affects them because they're in camps, it makes it very, very difficult to build peace once war has started.
Yeah, I think war has a direct relation with harmed dignity of human beings, I think.
Yes, it takes away dignity because suddenly you become a beggar. Suddenly you're staying in squalid camps that you didn't know. Suddenly that environment is not healthy for children. So it brings a lot of anger and frustrations in making peace because everybody is in that spirit to revenge because of the indignity that they're being treated with. It's even if they go as they live as refugees in other countries, it's not comfortable life. It's still, I repeat what I said earlier, it's it takes away and the loss of your loved ones. They're all very painful in a manner that affects peace processes in a very negative way.
Thank you, Betty. You really explained very well about the effects of the war for human beings, and we also wondered about another point. We know that you have mediation experiences in Sudan too. Could you share your experiences about this process? And additionally, how can you describe the differences between interstate and interstate conflicts? How do you compare these conflicts based on your experiences?
First of all, there was conflict between Sudan and Uganda, and that was negotiated by President Carter. So I was providing technical support to President Carter. So that way, I was looking at the interstate conflict. Now, with interstate conflict, the issues can be very, very serious, but in a way to mediate is slightly easier. Why do I say this? Slightly easier because when the war ends, everybody goes to their countries. They're not facing one another every day. So, but intrastate is where you have brothers killing one another. And it's very, very difficult to build that confidence. And for them to start looking at one another as one people, it takes a lot of time. The psychological impact of it, up to today, the war, take for example, the genocide in Rwanda. Don't expect people overnight to come to terms with what has happened to them. And in mediation, we often do not take into consideration the importance of psychosocial support, of trying to heal the wounds of those who have been impacted directly or indirectly by the conflict. It's very important that psychosocial support is given to people. They've lost their loved ones, or they've experienced terrible things, or they have seen terrible things happen to them. So it haunts them. It's also not easy for them to start picking up pieces of their lives immediately. So, in mediation, we need to integrate psychosocial support. So, In Sudan with Uganda, I was providing technical support to President Carter, but it was also, I must say, the parties were not convinced about the mediation. But this is former President of United States of America. So uh, they went into the room for mediation, not out of conviction, but out of convenience, because this was the President of United States of America. In fact, that mediation had a lot of shortfalls. And again, I still remember vividly telling President Carter that the parties were not convinced. They want to, it's because you are the president, former president of the United States of America. So they agreed to go and sign the document. But the outstanding issues had not been appropriately addressed. So he was rushing through it. And I said, yes, they will sign, but it will not be implemented. And yes, they did sign an agreement, but was never implemented, just like I had predicted. And that probably takes me a little bit on the other side, because the recent mediation is in South Sudan, not the main Sudan. The recent one is South Sudan. But it takes me to the point that it is very crucial that once an agreement has been signed, the mediators usually pack up and leave. Now, it's very, very easy for the countries for to go back to war. So I usually urge that it's important to mediate and remain to make sure that the agreement is implemented. A case in point, the recent one of South Sudan. Yes, an agreement was reached. The parties were left to implement it. And up to now, not even a quarter of the agreement has been implemented. The transition period is ending end of this year. And I guess what we are going to do is to extend the the transition period, because they have not implemented the most crucial aspects of the agreement, which is security reform. Uh, because without security, nothing is going to move. So I always urge that the parties must remain as long as possible, as long as it takes. Look, not everybody goes to in the implementation room. So what I also experienced with South Sudan recently is understanding the agreement if they are implementing some of them. It turns out that, the language, of course, is usually very legalistic. So you need a lawyer to remain with the people to interpret what exactly did they mean by certain articles in the agreement. Sometimes I saw the difficulty that the team that was in charge of implementation of the agreement just trying to understand the language alone, so that they can implement it, because negotiation starts all over again during implementation. And therefore the mediators who know what 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 they negotiated and what was agreed to remain with the team to interpret what is contained in the agreement. Otherwise, the whole exercise can relapse. The South Sudan case, up to today, there's fighting, communal fighting, because the issue of inclusivity was left out in the mediation. It is the elite who are brought into the room. and not enough effort was made to go and explain to the ordinary people what they were doing. And the agreement, if you look at it, it's about power sharing. Nothing, there's not much. The issues, the drivers of the conflict, especially now I'm talking about communal conflict that is going on. One tribe is killing the other. They're trading accusations. Those who came for the negotiation are living in town, which is peaceful, but you cannot go to the countryside and where people are. So there are lots of problems with that. Part of it is because uh, it was not inclusive. Uh, Mediation, I believe that we must not ignore track three. A lot of concentration is always on track one, mediation, ignoring track three, track two, which are very crucial because that is where the common man, the majority of people affected, are, and we must not leave them out. Of course, not everybody will be in the mediation room, but explaining to people, getting their views during the process is very important, so that whatever you arrive at is sustainable, is acceptable to the people, and in a way, they also feel their views have been taken into consideration during negotiations.
Yeah, but it is very nice to listen you because you are sharing very very important and significant information and observation with us. So, we just wanted to change the dimension to gender issue. Maybe we want to ask about this uh, subject because it is also very important and we are wondering about your experiences. What is it like to be a woman mediator in a system where men play an active role in making war? As a woman mediator, what challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Could you explain a little bit about this process?
Thank you. Like I said earlier on, the mentality or of people generally, and this is not just peculiar to Africa, this is everywhere, culture. I was involved in the Colombian peace talks. I was taken to Colombia by UN Women and to see if I could train women to be part of the mediation team. The government of Colombia was very resistant about involving women. FARC, which was the rebel group, they had very many women fighters with them. Consequently, they came with women to the negotiation room in Havana, Cuba, whereas the government side was very reluctant in involving women. So culture is part of it. Although now women are fighters as well, but there's that mindset that this is a male domain. There's also the feeling that women get very emotional, which is true. I also found out that emotions played in women's favor sometimes. Again, let me go back to the case of Sudan. Women stormed in, men, and talked to them as their mothers or their sisters, that you are raping us and you're killing us. And very emotional. And I could see men looking down and not looking up because they felt ashamed that they were making their mothers suffer, or sisters, or even their wives suffer. So there's that mindset. The, there's also perception that men, when they talk with, with power, very forcefully, and probably they believe that yes, then they would be heard better. This is not true. Actually, I found out that, okay, first of all, the right now, what is happening is women are being included, not because it's demand driven, not because they've seen the value women bring to the table, but it's because the founders of mediation always insist on having certain percentage of women participate in mediation. So what kind of women mediators are taken? Usually not women who will articulate women issues. These are women who are taken are loyalists to both sides, who will talk on behalf of the group that has taken them in. So it's more becoming statistics as opposed to the value women bring to the table that add to the peace process. And we've said this, and you all know that bringing in women, they will talk on social issues. I've just given the example of South Sudan. The agreement is just about power sharing. It's not that, education is important, health, and all these issues should be addressed. But how many houses the other side will have, how many cabinet positions they will have. So those are usually, issues that affect their communities are usually brought in by women and not necessarily men. I mean, dominantly, because the woman looks at her well being and how she's handling her community and talks come about that. So culturally in Africa, it's a male domain, even governments, even our regional organizations. We have African Union. We have other sub-regional organizations. They talk about it, but they do not walk the talk. When there is conflict, it comes to selection of who should be mediators. You'll find that it's all dominated by men. Yeah. So that mindset is still very, very strong. They talk about it. You'll have a well-written document on how women should be included. But when that reality, translating it into reality comes, it's it becomes difficult. But of course, the challenges I faced, like I said earlier on, I was dismissed. Like, I mean, she cannot manage it. So it took extra work to convince people to build that trust in me. It is also sometimes a woman is observed, they get to how the look of a woman, whether she wears lipstick or not. So, you have all these issues. They're small, but psychologically, they affect you because they're not focusing on issues, but they start focusing on your looks or what you've said, if it is sexy or not sexy. So, psychologically, yes, sometimes you get carried away. But the most important thing is even if you're scared, sometimes I was very scared. It was a very dangerous situation, but I put on a face that was deceptive, that I was not scared at all. But my heart could be pumping out of my chest in some serious situations, either danger or it's because spoilers are trying to interfere with what you're doing. The first time, yes, the effort was sabotaged, and that greatly hurt me. It affected me very badly psychologically. And later, I picked up the pieces and decided not to give up and continue because it was not the fault of those who were victims. It's because other people pursue their own interest, and therefore can, if you allow yourself, then you get distracted, and it can get very easy to mess up, or simply say, "I'm not going to do it anymore." But I was strong-willed. Nothing was going to deter me, even after sabotage. I picked up the pieces and went back and mediated. Right. But the other thing I must say is also how to balance your social life, your private life. If you have a family, it can easily, very easily take a toll on the family. One, your absence, and sometimes you're dealing with very deadly situations. You know, you can't get over seeing dead bodies all over places and killed in the most terrible manner. So, but balancing with the family, or if you don't have a family yet, socially, it is very important that you find a way, and psychologically it helps also, is if you can close up for some moment, you feel revived and ready to go more miles. Yes.
Ah, Betty, you inspired us a lot, and it's really difficult to say something after your experiences. Really, I haven't. I have faced some difficulties to find some words after your stories, your experiences, your observations. And also, you mentioned about the effects of women on the mediation table, which is really strong observations, I think. And also, I would like to add maybe one of the effects, maybe I would like to add, which is the victim oriented point of view of women mediators. This is the other strong things maybe I would like to add. And also, you mentioned this kind of things as well, I know. As another question, I would like to ask you about how should the activists to contribute the sustainable peace, because you mentioned that it can be quite easy to turn back to war for many times and for many reasons. So in this difficult and slippery ground, how should we stand out for as an activist, as a peace builder, as a mediator? Can you explain this based on your own experiences and observations, maybe a bit?
Yes, I can. But let me also add in here before I go to your question that I think I find women natural mediators because when they are raising their babies and the babies are fighting one another, they negotiate with them. And there is patience, which is a big virtue. I have been attended mediation where somebody comes and says, by 2 o'clock, I'll tell you this. Again, this was on Sudan, and it was President Carter. So he sent one of his representatives who came and said, I'm going to lock you in until you agree by this afternoon, you must sign an agreement. Now, this is not out of conviction. This is out, do it to satisfy that person. One, because I find that women are more patient when it comes to listening. Sometimes they talk a lot of rubbish, but because they've been victims, because they're so traumatized, it helps if you just listen. I've seen it in the recent past in the case of South Sudan. Some people broke out and said, "You made us sign an agreement that we were not ready to." And when we signed, what happened? When war started, you were not there. We were left alone. And I lost my so and so, I lost my so and so, I lost so and so, because you made us sign an agreement for the sake of signing it. We didn't. So this time, you're not going to force us to sign an agreement that we don't believe in. That patience, because here was in this case, the deputy president of South Africa joined me, and he was saying, "Let's sign this. Let's get this thing done." So it wasn't fair. I also put him aside and said, it was not fair to really. These are people who have lived it. They know how they feel, and so it's very important that we give them time to discuss. Now, coming back to your question, well, one, I believe in advocacy. Train more women and do advocacy. Let me back up a little bit. I found the grassroots women extremely they can play a very important role. It is these grassroots women whose sons are fighting most of the time. It is these grassroots women who are wives to some of the fighters, who are mothers to some of the fighters, who are affected most in case of wars because they're the ones who live in camps. They're the ones who nurse the sick ones. They're the ones who go out to look for some assistance because humanitarian assistance, food, in the case of Africa, our families are big. So food is distributed based on the Western way of whether on average you have 6 children or 6 people in a family. So they venture out to go and supplement whatever they're given in the camps. In that process, they're the ones who are talking to the rebels. My case, it took me to go and stay in internally displaced camps or with refugees to be able to know what goes on in their minds, to be able to persuade them to reach out to their sons, because sometimes we would find if drugs were given, medicine were given, you'll find that that medicine is also in the rebel camps. How do they get there? These people have coordinators. They leak information to them. They tell them the strength of the of government forces or of the enemy forces. So it was then my duty to go, and I wasn't going to say, stop fighting. I wanted to find out why you are fighting. I want you to be part of a solution. I want to bring you into this. So that is why I was saying earlier, we oftentimes neglect track 3, mediation. This is where the grassroots play a very important role. This is where, if I'm in mediating track 1, I must not lose contact. The structure must be that I have link, that I consult, I get information from them. And if we know war is about to break out, we as women, as a group, either in groups or as individuals, go out to talk and be loud about it, that this is going to affect our lives. These fighters have mothers, they have wives, or women who are also fighting these days. Most armies have women as well. To reach out to fellow women and talk to them and try to persuade them, somebody somewhere will listen. But once we leave it to the media, only to be broadcasting what has happened on the world front, and we're not being heard anymore. We should also have media, women writers that we talk to, that our messages as women can be carried out, that we do not want this war. Okay. I was quite impressed. Some women in Russia who spoke out, unfortunately, they got arrested, but nevertheless, they were heard, they were seen. The only problem is their appeal, their cry out for peace has not been heard. But nevertheless, we should we should be talking. I was very happy when I was in your country to be. We were not many women, but nevertheless, I felt very privileged that I was brought all the way from Africa, also to be heard that this war now is affecting the world all over, cost of living and all other major issues, right? So we must keep the fire burning. We must not keep quiet. And I'm not hearing many. I belong to very many network of women mediators, but we are not talking. We're talking to ourselves. We're not talking out, reaching out to the fighters, which is not a very good thing. We should not only talk in times of peace. war is going on now, we women should come out to say something about it. You are closer, your country, you're closer, you're next door actually, and therefore hearing from women that are neighbors is a must, and not keep quiet. Yes.
Thank you, Betty. You underlined very, very important points about the mediation process and also gender dimension of the peace building process, actually. You also emphasized some important concepts such as conflict analysis, revenge culture, prevention diplomacy, level of mediation, being woman in peace, and so on. They are so valuable and inspiring for us, actually. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for all your sharings and of efforts in this field, Betty. And we know that we need to make your incredible story and observations widespread in our region and country as well. So thank you again. We wish we would had more time with you in this episode. We are sure that you have more experience and knowledge than you elaborate here as an active mediator and peace builder. So we are sorry for the limited time actually.
No, it's okay. Please don't hesitate to let me know if there's something you want further explanation. Then I can do it as long as you let me know ahead of time. Thank you very much, and wish you all the best. Let's start talking to the Russians and Ukrainians. Let's reach out. Thank you very much again. Take care.